just want to thank you all for just coming out and singing. It's been such a tremendous encouragement to us in the band, and I'm hoping that it's been also an encouragement to you as well. Without any further ado, we're looking at Tasty Chords. By the way, this is not my title idea, but it is one of my favorite topics to talk about. So I'm more than happy to start things early, and I'll try to end on time, but I'll probably be late. So Tasty Chords, growing your piano technique to Sweeten and Deepen congregational singing. Okay, sick. Here we go. So before we kind of jump into the nitty-gritty, and I'm happy to go nitty-gritty with theory and stuff, and we probably will. I just want to kind of take a big overview of principles of harmony in congregational worship. So 3 specific things that come to my mind right off the bat are, first, to know the melody. Right? It seems pretty obvious, but harmony, if I were to define harmony, I would say harmony is the relationship between notes. Right? And the melody note, at any given time, I would say is the most important note to be aware of. Second to which might be the bass note. But the melody, right? That's what people are singing. Right? Congregational singing, we're singing melodies, right? So we want to make sure that our harmony is supporting those melodies. Number 2, know the lyrics. Okay, again, this might come across pretty obvious, but the harmony exists to support and accentuate the meaning of the lyrics, right? So we want to pick harmony that is appropriate. Okay, and number 3, finally, know the standard versions. So not all hymns, especially the modern hymns, necessarily have standard versions in the same way that older hymns that you may have grown up singing in hymnals might. But in any case, there are standard traditional harmonizations of worship songs, especially those older hymns. Okay, and I think starting with that foundation is great. You know, these hymns were conceptualized a certain way. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel, so to speak. Right? Start with what how Charles Wesley intended the hymn to be sung, and then maybe work your way forward from there. But I think it's really helpful to start with some sort of foundation. Okay. So I'm going to use How Great Thou Art as a template of digging into some concepts today. Hopefully you all know it. We're going to be singing it a lot. Singing it at least 4 times. This is an old hymn, right? And actually, before we even start, the rhythm of the melody is different. I see some nods, right? It's always one of those awkward ones that different people sing different ways. We're going to sing it, if you can read music, we're going to sing it like this, just to warm up this afternoon. But then as we look at subsequent versions of different harmonization options, the downbeat of that first bar is going to be a little bit longer than what's written there. Okay, so just a little bit note that I don't mean to confuse anybody as we go on. So let's warm up. We're in B flat here. Can everyone hear the piano? Is that good? Okay, cool. Okay, so there are, that's kind of the standard, I kind of embellish it a little bit, but that's the standard, what's in the hymnal, what's in most hymnals. I check hymnary.com, I check my own Trinity hymnal at home. This is kind of what you get when you start with How Great Thou Art. Okay, I just want to set that up as a foundation. So, moving forward from there, let's talk a little bit about why we might use tasty chords, right? That hymnal version is pretty good, right? You know, might make some different choices harmonically, but why use tasty chords? I guess that's why I'm here to answer that question. But let's see what everyone thinks.
To bring it into, like, taking traditional music and bringing it into the now and making it today relevant without changing the words of the music, and keeping the tune, but updating it.
Yeah, so like modernizing it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Keep it fresh when you're singing 4 or more verses, right? Keep it fresh.
Keep it fresh when you're singing multiple verses, right? 4 more verses. Yes.
Maybe because you're thinking about the lyrics a little differently.
Yeah, right. Not every verse conveys the same emotion, right? So it might make sense, you know, a third verse that has more introspective lyric, right? It might make sense to harmonize that differently. Sure. Yeah. Anyone else? It's a great answer.
It enriches the whole composition.
Say it one time.
It enriches the whole composition.
It enriches the whole composition. Yes, absolutely. These are great answers. I think this is pretty much what I had in mind. Right? So it helps kind of cut down on redundancy, right? Both kind of the macro redundancy of 4 verses, right, being the same harmonization as it were written. Right? It doesn't make sense to have an 8-page version of How Great Thou Art necessarily in a hymnal where every page is a few cents, right? Number 2, it helps create direction, right? I think that's kind of what it helps fill out the composition a little bit. Locally, it can kind of help you lead, or help lead the congregation to an arrival at certain points, different cadences. And then, as someone else said, kind of connecting more with the lyrics, right? Text painting would be a term that's used in classical music a lot, where the harmony or even orchestration helps illustrate what the lyrics are talking or singing about. Right? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, cool. If you disagree, feel free to raise your hand. Right? And what's really important, and I'm not going to harp on this because this is the sing conference, so I think everyone is on the same page here, but this all exists to support congregational singing, right? As is commanded in Scripture, we are to sing to the Lord, right? And so we want to make sure that in all these things, our focus is not on ourselves, right? It's not on even how cool the harmony is, even though admittedly, that's kind of what today, this hour is about, is talking about how cool this is, right? But the big picture, right, is to sing glory to God in heaven, right? So I just want to make sure that is clear. I think it probably is. Moving on. Okay, so here are 3 different scenarios in which, in my experience or in talking to people, I think where you can employ or deploy tasty chords. Right, some scenarios. So number 1, we're talking about the piano specifically today, but this could apply to any other solo chordal instrument like a guitar even. But if you're in the context of a worship band or something, you know, this could be a context where maybe you're the MD, or maybe through your own admission you're the best musician on stage. You're more aware than everyone else, right? Those types of scenarios where maybe it's not worth potentially confusing the issue with other musicians on stage. Right? People who might not be comfortable even with a 1/3, right? I mean, what on earth is that? And there's no judgment there, right? It's amazing that music is such a thing where so many people can serve with it, right? So it's not a knock on anybody, but perhaps you're in a situation where you are far and away the better musician in the room, and you're looking to employ tasty chords, so to speak, or create a little variety here and there. So we're going to look at scenarios in which the piano can create that change without having to even communicate necessarily with what everyone else is doing. So we'll find little sneaky ways in which you can do things here, but everyone else can do the exact same thing. Does that make sense? So that would be the first scenario. Number 2, maybe it's a little bit more advanced, an advanced ensemble, and they do know what a 1/3 chord is, right? Or 4/6, and you can talk about little passing chords, right? So that's what we're going to talk about number 2. And then the third scenario would be maybe more complex reharmonization approaches, right? The cool theory, nerdy stuff. Okay, so I'm going to try to move through this. I have 40 minutes. So tasty can mean a lot of things, right? It's like if you're cooking, it's all subjective. What is tasty? Some people just like a little salt. Some people can't get enough salt, right? Some people need onion powder, garlic powder, oregano, pepper, paprika, you know. So tasty is subjective, admittedly. However, with major and minor triads, which are 3-note chords, root, third, and fifth, there are some common color extensions, right? Chord extensions or colors that can be helpful starting points, right? So I'll flip to that screen and we'll just look at some common ways that you can spice up a major triad, okay? However, context is always going to be the best indication of what works, okay? So there's going to be a lot of theory talk, and a common question is, well, how do I know how to do, how to reharmonize? Context, and we'll talk about context, okay? So major chords. Everyone know what a major chord is? No judgment if you know. Okay, thumbs up on major chords. So for a B flat, B flat major triad, that's a B flat, D, and an F. Some common options to create variety in major triads are first subtraction, right? You can take out the third, right? So instead of just like root and fifth, right? So it's just more of a shell, more open voicing. Moving up from there, maybe a 2, a B flat 2, which by definition would be root, a second scale degree, and a fifth, right? So if you thought about a B flat major triad, you would just move the D, which is a major third, down a whole step to a C, and it's that sound right there. Okay, we'll put some of these in context here in a bit. Number 3, a B flat add 2 or a B flat add 9, we'll say are the same for purpose of discussion right now, would be a major triad, right, but adding a fourth note. So B flat, D, F, but also adding that C in there. Right? You can voice it different ways, but there's 4 notes in that chord right there. Fourth, a B flat major 7. Okay, so at the risk of making it sound like bossa nova, we can add a major 7. So instead of just a B flat, D, and F, you can add the major 9. It's that color. And you'll see at the bottom there, I said the 7th scale degree, so in this case the A natural. It's a very strong flavor, okay? So use it responsibly. Make sure it works with the melodic and lyrical considerations. It doesn't always. In fact, it oftentimes doesn't because it's such a strong flavor, right? And especially where you put that 7th scale degree, because it is dissonant with the root of that chord, right? Finally, adding a 5th note, a B flat major 9, would be the same thing as a B flat major 7, but with that 9th scale degree, right? So again, you're adding even more complex relationships between the notes, right? If we're thinking about harmony as relationships between notes, we're not just adding one more relationship, we're adding 4 more relationships if you think about each relationship between each individual note. Okay, and I know that's a lot of kind of theory talk. Does that kind of make sense? Seems enough nods to move forward here. So let's put some of these in context. So here's a Shane and Shane harmonization of "Oh Lord My God" transposed to B flat major, and it's probably representative of something you might see in a worship band, a contemporary worship band, right? It's really just 3 chords. We do have a 1/3, a B flat over D in that 5th full measure, first bar of the 2nd line. But let's just go through this a little bit. I'm gonna talk. Actually, I'll put this up here so I'm talking away. All right, that's good enough. Okay, that would be a major triad. If we added a 9th scale degree to make it a B flat add 9, right? All of a sudden that colors it just a little bit differently, right? We do have to be careful with the C natural though in this context, right? Why?
Melody.
Yeah, melody, right? Because the melody is on the major 3rd, but if we're coloring it with the 9th, right, or the 2nd scale degree, it's the same thing. It's right up against the melody, right? So just be aware of that, right? As I said from the get-go, the melody is the most important note at any given time. Okay? Let's keep going. So this would be an E flat major, just three different notes. This would be a E flat major add 9. Okay, this would be an E flat major, major 7. Right? And why is that potentially problematic where I played it? Because of the melody, right? Again, the 7th scale degree in this context at D natural is right up against the melody note. Okay? There's a B flat major 7. I don't terribly dislike Did everyone take a picture who wanted to of the previous slide? Yeah, okay, cool. Let's move on. Let's talk about minor triads. It's a lot of the same thing. Okay, there's a few extra options here. Oh, yeah. I got it. Okay, thank you. Great. Our obstacle has been eliminated. Minor chords. Okay, so in the context of B flat major, G minor would be our minor 6 chord, or our 6 minor, you want to say here in Nashville. A lot of the same things apply, right? We can subtract the third, right? Instead of G minor, we could have just G and D as an option, right? We could have a G sus, sound like Jesus, right? G minor 7, G7 sus, or G sus 7. Sorry, it's quite B flat there, I shouldn't have. G9, G minor 9, which introduces the third back in there, and then G minor 11, which for this purpose is the G minor 9 with the C on top. Okay? These are just other options that, if you think of these as just, if you're looking for something and your ear's not necessarily leading you, you can kind of use this intellectual information to give yourself some options. Kind of go through them and think, well, does this work here? That's okay. Oh, I really like this. Does this work? Oh no, that major 7 is really clashing with the melody, right? You kind of, if you're looking for ways to kind of methodically reharmonize a verse 3 or a verse 4 in the context of not bothering anybody else necessarily, this could be a helpful template to work with. Okay, I'm going to keep moving for time because I want to talk about incorporating simple variety together. Okay, so. Okay, so the two things in this section, so if you remember, we're talking about how to do things where just the piano player is changing. Okay, now we've moved second to the whole band is moving together, okay? Or is able to move together. So passing chords, diatonic passing chords. Does everyone know what diatonic means?
In the key.
Yeah, so diatonic means belonging to a scale, right, basically. So it belongs to, so for example, a B flat major, the diatonic harmony would include only notes that belong to a B flat major scale, right? The easy thing on the piano, of course, is diatonic notes of C major are all the white keys, okay? Or diatonic to A minor, all the white keys, right? It's a relative minor. Secondly, we'll talk about using simple reharmonization in this context here. Moving forward, diatonic passing chords. Kind of a couple different ways to simply think about these. Number one would be to approach the chord you're headed to by step and or moving entirely by step. So there's two different options here. If you think about the opening of How Great Thou Art, we're moving basically from a 1 chord to a 4 chord. Right? That's kind of what happens in the first measure or the 2 measures depending on how quickly you're writing it, half time or double time. So one way to do this would be, if you're starting here and we want to arrive here, one way could just be 1/3, right? Right, so what we did, we found a way to create a chord that gets us from point A to point B via, in this case, a 1/3. Okay? And the reason that works in this context is because we're approaching the 4 chord, the second chord there, E flat, by step. Okay, so we're approaching the 4 chord with a 1/3 by step. We can also move by step. We can introduce a second passing chord. Again, if we're moving from here to our 4, we can go. Right, and we're creating more motion. Maybe more emotion as well, I don't know, but definitely more motion. The bass is going 1, 2, 3, 4, right? A simple walk up. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, yes?
Could you still do that with other people not following those exact chords?
Yeah, it depends on the instrumentation and how prominent you want it to be. Yeah. Sometimes you're right, arrangement or production-wise, it might be better if not everyone is moving together, right? Maybe it's just the piano player and the bass player and the guitar player just kind of hanging on a big open fifth like that.
Okay,
Good question. Okay. So I'm big on practical practice tips. So here's an example of how you can practice this, especially if this is a concept that is less familiar to you. So I think the main thing is just to get this way of thinking into your brain. It's not a terribly technically challenging exercise, right? It's more of kind of a intellectual, mental thing a hurdle to jump through. It's just taking diatonic triads in all three inversions, right? And just moving up by step in all 12 keys, even B major, right? And just making sure that way of thinking is familiar enough so that you can just do that, right? And so I practice 2 keys a day or something, right? And move up by a half step or move through the circle of fifths or practice major thirds apart. However you like the structure you're practicing in all 12 keys. Not everyone likes to practice in 12. I think most people don't like to practice in all 12 keys. But find a way where you can make it fun for yourself. Create a little game, make flashcards or something, and pull it out of the hat. Okay, does this make sense as a practice tip? Kind of incorporating that way of thinking. Great. Practice tip number 2 would just be to isolate locally some different chord progressions that are common, or that you like, or maybe that you're even working with in composing your own hymns, right? So we get like a 1, 6 minor, 4, 5, right? And finding ways to navigate through those chords with additional passing chords, right? Because again, it's subjective, and you can find something that you like, you might find something you don't like, which I think is just as valuable. And just find ways to kind of navigate a common chord progressions, kind of in your own practice, so that again, they become a little bit more natural if they're not already. Yes?
So you're not using letter and a number chords, which do you prefer?
Oh, me personally, I think I prefer letters personally, but I live in Nashville and the national number system is running rampant, so I have to adapt. But it's very, it's kind of like classical theory in a lot of ways with Roman numerals. It follows a lot of the same principles. Yeah. And it makes it a lot better for transposing, actually. So there's a huge advantage, especially in recording sessions where the singer comes in, they didn't sleep well, so everything is a minor third lower than what it was on the demo or something. Yeah. But yeah, I personally prefer slight preference to letters. Let's go right on. All right, so here is an example of how great thou art with 10% too many passing chords for illustration purposes. Okay, I wanted to take as many opportunities as I could to put these into context. It's not necessarily the final arrangement. Okay, so I'll play it once, and maybe can you see? Yeah. Okay. It's overdone on purpose, but you can kind of see how to put diatonic passing chords into context, right? Yeah.
Would you say that's overdone even if you're just playing by yourself?
I don't know. I think again, it's I don't know. What would you say? I just played it by myself.
I was thinking it sounded good by yourself.
Yeah.
I think in an accompaniment it might be a little too much.
Yeah. So again, kind of the context of the congregational worship. Maybe this is the standard. Some churches, maybe this is how things are played. So doing anything less might feel odd. I'm not aware of that church, but I haven't done it either. It's possible. it definitely draws more attention to the harmony, which is not always the best thing, right? If the aim is to focus on the lyrics, we don't want to create a distraction. But there are other times where kind of having a descending line is an interesting thing to have going on, especially maybe it's a double chorus and the second chorus has a little bit more gravitas, pulling down to a resolution somewhere at a cadence point. So I think it's subjective. I think this is overdone by 5 to 10%. But I think you could eliminate a few of those and it would be a fine option. Yes?
Why don't you use a G minor chord here on the second last line?
Yes.
And sings my soul on the G minor?
I don't know. That's a good question. Shane did that, so I might ask him backstage. But I thought it was an interesting. You're right. The feeling of a minor chord is not necessarily maybe the best pairing for "Sings My Soul." I kind of like it, but maybe my preference for it is just on the terms of kind of the novelty of it. So again, it's subjective. It's not. Who can say we can pull the room? Is it? How many people think the G minor is not the best choice there?
I say we do it on chorus 3 only.
Yeah.
All right, chorus 3 only. Yes.
You're right for a loop.
Yeah, it's a very good question, and again, I think it underscores the subjectivity of the reharmonization approach at all. Okay, I'm gonna keep moving because I also want to talk about non-diatonic, which is sometimes. Oh, sorry, I didn't.
How do you balance this with a situation where your congregation is reading from the hymnal and people are trying to sing parts, and suddenly you're playing something that clashes?
A very good question is how do you balance reharmonization or introducing the different passing chords even in the context of people reading or singing from hymnals and trying to read parts? I would say don't do this. Don't get in the way. Our church doesn't sing from hymnal or parts, but I did grow up in a church that did sing from a hymnal and tried to sing parts. And I think that's a wonderful thing. I love 4-part harmony. In fact, I think it's one of the best ways to even learn about harmony is from hymnals. That's how I learned actually how to read music was from a hymnal. Reading 4 parts every Sunday, playing 3 songs. Yes?
Sometimes in the last chorus, people say, okay, everyone sing in unison, and then you can just let it down.
Yes. Yeah, so the comment from the back was that maybe in the last chorus, everyone sings in unison. And then maybe that's a way to incorporate a different approach other than a hymnal approach. That's a good suggestion. Great. Any other questions before we move on to this third context? These are great questions. Thank you for asking. I think the best simple reharmonization enhances the music, right? I think that should be the goal. And I think I put this phrase 3 times in the presentation. Here's the first time. Just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Amen.
Sound like a mother. But with that in mind, there are different ways to reharmonize passing chords that incorporate what's known as secondary dominance. And that's a term from maybe classical theory more, but it's the idea that any chord, any major or minor chord, pretty much, can be thought of locally as a 1 chord. And therefore, if you backed up 1 step before that 1 chord, you could create a 5 chord that creates more pull to that 1 chord. Okay, so you're creating a secondary dominant to a local situation that is not the tonic, right? Not the 1 chord. So in this case, if we're moving from B flat to E flat, our first diatonic example of passing chords was moving up by diatonic triads, more or less, right? Moving from B flat major to the 2 chord C minor to the 1/3 to arrive at the 4 chord. Now, what if we wanted to create more of a feeling of arrival or emphasis on that arrival of that 4 chord? Well, we could think of E flat major, even though we are still in B flat major, we could think of E flat as a local 1 chord, so to speak, right? And think of, well, what is the 5 of 4, or what is the secondary dominant of E flat major? What is the dominant chord that pulls us, in this context, most strongly to E flat? And that would be a thinking of it almost as a temporary shift to E flat major, where we have a B flat 7, right? Right, but we're still in B flat major. Okay? And so in context, what this means is that instead of just playing a B flat over D as the third chord of this chord sequence, we're adding an A flat, which in this immediate context is the dominant 7th of the B flat chord, which pulls us to that E flat. I'm seeing a few confused faces, so please ask questions.
Is the dominant 7th always to get to the 5th? When you put a 1 over 3 like that, the dominant 7th, does that always get you to the 5th?
The dominant 7th gets you to the 5th. I'm not sure what you mean by the 5th in this case.
The 4th.
Oh, the 4th. Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Long week, 4th.
Yeah. In this context, it's a very common progression.
Okay.
Yeah. Kind of almost like a formula. Right, that's the final line. B flat, C minor, B flat 7 over D, creating more pull to E flat, as opposed to the line immediately above that, B flat, C and minor. Okay, it's a very slight color difference, but it creates more of a tension in that immediate moment, and therefore is more satisfying release. So in the context of, here's another example. Actually, let me put this in the context. I'll just take the picture in a second. Right, so that's that chord progression, C minor. Right, there's a new note that doesn't belong to B flat major. Right, the A flat is not in the key signature of B flat major, but we're introducing it via this chord that functions as a 5 or a dominant of E flat major. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Yes.
Is there any value in a different, let's say, scenario
Yeah.
of omitting the C minor,
Yeah.
but still doing the B flat 7?
Yes. So the question was, is there any value in omitting the C minor, just jumping to the B flat 7 or B flat 7 over D? Absolutely. Yeah. It's a very common thing to do. 1, 7 over 3 to 4. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Here's another example, kind of out of context, but yeah. So this could be another reharmonization, I think, of the. It's a little bit maybe overdone of the opening. Right. So it's a different pathway to get from B flat major to E flat. Right. Just walking down instead of going up, like we did in the previous example, we're picking a bass line to get us to E flat major via the other way. It's taking the scenic route home from Kroger as opposed to the most direct route. Okay, so if this is the diatonic options, the first one that I play, here is the non-diatonic, or we're thinking about secondary dominance. That's nice, right? Yeah. So, but it's not complicated. Okay, and let me show you why it's not complicated. We're thinking of it in the same way that we thought about the last example. It just happens that there's 2 secondary dominants at different points, right? So, if you can see, I underlined the D7 over A going to G minor, right? Because that's functioning as a unit. That's a 5 to 1. Thinking of G minor as a 1, localized 1, right? It's not B flat, but in this case we're harmonizing it as if it is the 1 locally, okay? And then immediately after that, we have that B flat 7 again. We just have it in a different inversion, right? Because we're headed down to E flat as opposed to up to E flat. We're still approaching E flat by step, right? But instead of moving like we did in the first example, we're going G minor and then B flat 7 over F, right? But it's the same concept. You see that everything is still a 5 to 1, 5 to 1. It's just we're putting them in. There's more of them, right? And there's more notes that don't belong to more chromatically introduced notes, like more non-diatonic notes. Instead of just A flat, we have a F sharp in the D flat 7, which is definitely not in the key signature B flat major, right? Yes.
How do you fit those extra chords in with the rhythm of the song?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, for those on the live stream, how do you fit the chords in with the rhythm of the song? I would just kind of, it's kind of like math. You know, I would think about what is the time signature of the song, and then where's the arrival point, kind of big picture, where are you starting and where are you ending, and then how many subdivisions exist reasonably. You know, we're not looking for like triplet 16th notes. You know, that would be too much. You know, what's a reasonable subdivision that we can move through? And it doesn't have to be all of those chords, right? It could be out the second chord there and held it for 2 beats, and then I gave 1 beat each to the G minor and the B flat 7 over F. Right? So I would just kind of look, it's in 4/4 time signature. Beat 1 is a B flat major chord. Beat 1 of the second bar is an E flat major chord, and therefore you have 4 beats to work with, inclusive of the very first beat 1.
Could you talk a little bit how, which inversion that you're using in that example? For example, you start for B flat, and then you jump into D7, and you move in your 5th finger up. What are you doing?
Why did I choose D7?
What are you doing? What are the inversions you are using?
What inversion am I using?
On each chord, if you could.
I think he's
Yeah.
talking about in your right hand. Like how are you shaping that chord in your right
Oh,
hand?
okay. Yeah. How am I shaping the inversion of my right hand relative to the chord symbols? Yeah, great. A very good question. In this immediate instance, I'm thinking about the melody. So I'm trying to voice the chords on or below the melody note. And I'm just aware enough of the melody to be able to kind of do that on the fly. But I think it would be worth doing, kind of working through methodically as well. And then I'm thinking, what is a D7 chord with an A in the bass that exists with D, because that's the melody note, the most important note, that exists on or below D7, or the D. And so I chose to play a C below the melody, an A below that, an F sharp below that with my left hand, and an A below that. Alright, so that's the second inversion. And then moving down from there, I'm just kind of thinking about moving as little as possible, kind of a voice leading approach, almost as if it were a hymnal, right? Thinking about the least amount of motion needed to move from each individual point to the next adjacent point forward. Specifically, I would go from there, and I would resolve the A down to G, the F sharp up to G, the C down to B flat, and the A would probably also go up to B flat. If I were singing, I would sing it twice, but I have a piano, so I only play it once. Alright, so, and then from there, just move the octaves down. And then if I'm here with the B flat, then I just play another B flat and add an A flat below that. Yeah. I guess the tip for how to figure that out on your own would just be to work through each chord slowly and think about, do I have to move this note? You can play it again, but do I have to move this note at all to account for a note that is in the next chord? If not, then just play the same note, but times 4 or 5, or how many notes are in the voice. And then, if I do have to move notes, what is the least amount of movement that it takes to move to the next note in the chord? So that's how I would think about that.
Thank you.
Good, yeah. Okay, so here's the secondary dominant reharmonization of how great y'all are. What are we on time? Okay, I think I'm supposed to wrap up in 5 minutes to give you time for questions. All right, you guys want to sing this one? Sure. Take the pictures in one second. Okay, here we go. 1, 2. Yeah, ask questions. I think that's probably the most efficient way of talking about it.
If you have a new bass player and you're trying to do this and he's only doing roots and stuff,
Uh-huh.
should you just not try it at all, or how much should you push your bass player to learn these passing things?
I'm not sure. I think it depends on the bass player. I do think about this kind of third way of thinking about reharmonization as something that is probably best executed in the context of a band where everyone feels more or less comfortable with this approach. So if he's not comfortable,
Just go straight with the straight.
I think so, yeah.
Will it sound weird if he's only doing the roots and you're trying to move all the way around?
Oh, I would say probably default to the first approach we talked about, where just like you play piano.
Yeah.
I would say probably just approach it more simply from your perspective. Look for ways that you can color things differently, but where you're the only one doing changes. If that makes sense. Now this could be something to aspire to, and it could certainly be something where, at the beginning of the month you give him this, be like, this would be something great. I'd love to work towards this, but it's not going to be something that we program for this Sunday, or maybe even next Sunday. Maybe this is the first Sunday in October. Let me try it, or maybe we try it in the rehearsal for the first Sunday in October. And if it doesn't work, no worries. But this you could kind of clue him or her into thinking this kind of way. I think bass players actually a lot of times do think this way because they're in charge of that most of the time, one note at a time, right? And so, on the fretboard, things lie, stepwise motion makes a lot of sense most of the time. So, I think it might be conducive to this way of thinking. You may not realize it yet.
If you do have an experienced bass player, how much do you coordinate with? I'm going to do this passing phrase. You follow me along. Like, will it sound weird if you're like going up and he's going down and all that?
Well, I would say certainly make sure you're doing the same chord, like following the same chord sheet. Like if you're approaching like from B flat to E flat, I do think it might sound weird if you're going up and he's going down, because you'd be playing different chords en route to getting to E flat, two different ways, right? But if you're following the same chord chart and he's playing the same bass line that you're following, I think that could sound very strong. Yeah, there's a question back there. Yes.
Whenever we had a new bass player who was just playing roots, we only do third inversion. When you do it, it doesn't matter what you play, it'll always match up with his bass line.
You kind of lead him to thinking that way. Yeah, that's cool. Do you have a question?
Oh yeah, I was gonna say, how do you handle your pitch with muddy or with tasty chords, right? If it's on the low end or the high end, how do you modulate that, right?
Pitch meaning the notes, the voicings?
Yeah. High on the piano, low on the
Oh,
piano.
like the register of the, yeah. So like, how do I think about register in terms of incorporating?
Can you get away with more seasoning on a higher register than on a lower register, or vice versa, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So for the live stream, the question is, how do you think about register in the context of, like, where can you get away with more? I don't know that there's one register where you can get away with more. I do think that the lower register, because of how the physics of sound work, is less conducive to close voicings. So I think having to be aware that's why we're often playing octaves or fifths or more spaced out voicings in the left hand if we are even playing involved left hand part. I don't think the register really matters in that, like in terms of how much you can get away with. I think register is another tool or another ingredient, if you will, that you can use to season. In creating variety, also moving up can make things feel more open, even if it is the same chord symbol that you're working on. Cool. Yes. Yes.
On that same line, if you've got strong vocalists, how much can you suggest we play up higher, rather than staying below the melody?
It's a good question. Yeah, I'll try to answer this really quickly. There's the talk I did last year, though, about leading congregational worship from the piano, where I do talk about this a lot. I do think that it's important to, if you have very strong vocalists, to make sure that they have the room to do their thing, right? Because we're there to support them, not vice versa. I do think the higher register, again, because of how the acoustics of sound work, is going to typically draw people's attention. It might depend on the mix, but The higher you go, the more attention is drawn to the higher notes, typically. However, if it's done so that you're kind of creating that space in the middle of the piano so that they can shine, I think that's fine to do. But I wouldn't necessarily live up there the whole time. Yeah.
But you can use it for decorative.
Absolutely. Yes. Absolutely. Yes. Back there.
How do the keyboard and the piano work together on a worship team?
Oh, how do the keyboard and piano work together on a worship team? That's welcome to the Sing 2024 presentation. Yes. I think my short answer would be
Grace and mercy.
Yeah, grace and mercy. That's very good. And, I think making sure communication is at a very high level, and that the roles are defined. That's what I would say. Because anyone can do anything, pretty much, especially more advanced players, but just making sure that the roles are defined. Yeah.
So, how important is it or beneficial, do you think, because I know, like, most of us probably just play piano here.
Yeah.
Is it better to, like, just dive full in on enhancing your skill on this, or is it more beneficial to actually, like, broaden your horizons and play? Because, we've seen people switch out from bass and then all the other instruments, so is it beneficial to incorporate that and learn those instruments, or is it better to just hone your skills on just the one in order to enhance something like this, like chords?
That's a good question. The question is it better to kind of focus on one instrument to get to a more comfortable place of reharmonization, or to maybe even learn more instruments to kind of widen the worship team capability, maybe? Really the answer I think would be what does your church need? Because you're there to serve on the worship team. So you use the wisdom, or ask somebody what they think, who is also on the worship team. What would be the most beneficial to the church? Yeah.
Question.
Yes.
If you're asked to maybe underscore somebody speaking,
Yeah.
is there a progression that would be easy to kind of be underneath but be tasteful at the same time?
Yeah. The question is if you're underscoring someone speaking or praying or something, is there a progression that is easy to kind of work through? I'm a big fan of kind of stepwise progressions because they're easy to keep track of, right? You can kind of, piano's such a visual instrument, you can just kind of see what note is coming next. So you could just kind of move down. I'm just moving down the scale diatonically. Now you could also introduce kind of I think 4 slides ago where we had secondary dominance. And then basically every other chord is a secondary dominant. You don't have to play it, like you're playing with a metronome. You kind of noodle. Things like that, if it's emotionally appropriate, this is what I have a lot of attention to. I think it depends on the context again. That's my reference. I do have one more slide that I do want to talk about because it is kind of the next iteration. I think I'm out of time though, so if you guys want to shut down the live stream, feel free. The complexity idea, because that was kind of the extension. The third thing we're talking about is complexity. I think of complexity with harmony as just a variation on simplicity. I think that's the best way to think about complex harmony. It's just a variation on simplicity because so many of the same principles apply. There's only 12 different notes on the chromatic scale that's become standard in Western music. And so if you think about 12 as opposed to how many different rhythms exist, there's thousands, hundreds of thousands of different rhythms, 2-measure rhythmic loops, But in terms of chords and notes, there's only 12 different notes, right? So even with the complex harmonic approaches, there's a lot of simplicity that's at the foundation of those approaches. So one example, just a real practical example, is instead of just thinking about one secondary dominant, having a second secondary dominant. Okay, so that is a chord that comes before the secondary dominant that sets up the secondary dominant, which then sets up the localized dominant. Okay, so we're just working backwards one additional step. So in the jazz world, there's the term 2-5-1, right? Or in gospel, it's a very common 2-5-1 progression. And you see a lot of gospel music that uses localized 2-5-1 progressions. In fact, I did use one in the previous example of How Great Thou Art, going into the second line where it was then. So it's 2, 5, 1 to G minor in context there. But the 2 is going to be, if you think about the one secondary dominant introducing one chromatic tone, a second secondary dominant will oftentimes introduce a second chromatic tone, right? So it draws your ear out, it kind of makes you think, what's happening, or it pulls your ear in a different way. Again, non-harmony. So here's an example of that. Again, if we're moving from B flat up to E flat. We've done this many times already. We've done the diatonic version. We've done the version with one secondary dominant, 4 to E flat. We could also do a 2-5-1 to E flat. Right? And we're using the same bass motion. In this case, it works. Right? I can't say it'll always work this nicely, but that's why I chose this example, because I didn't have to work too hard. Right, so we're introducing a chord before the B flat 7 that functions as a 2 to the B flat 7, right? 2, 5, and then 1. Okay? Here's another example of that. We're adding more chords, right? So if we're going down, each chord has a 2-5-1 that precedes it. And again, these are just options to create even more colors. Okay? This is not prescriptive, it's just kind of a descriptive example of something you can do. Okay?
Would you ever do the major 7 on the 4 ever, or is it too far?
Yeah, you might. It might work. It was also the example of being careful with the melody. Right. You get that minor second there. But absolutely, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with having the major 7 on that 4 major chord. Okay, the last thing I'll say is, if you want to just take these ideas even further and as kind of a springboard for more thought and experiment, I think voice leading is a great thing to consider as a means of identifying additional chord extensions, often moving horizontally. So that idea just being, if you're moving from one chord to another, don't feel necessarily confined by what's on the page or how chord symbols theoretically work vertically. Think about harmony again as just individual note relationships that just happen, they happen to be vertically played, but they're really moving horizontally. Okay, I think that when that was first kind of explained to me, that really opened up my mind to consider harmony in a different way. Thinking of each note of a chord as a melody that is simultaneously sounding, right? It's just a different way of approaching harmony. Second, voice leading as a means of creating additional bass motion. We've used a lot of bass motion already as the foundational examples of reharmonizing or adding passing tones. But harmonizing bass off the bass motion is another great kind of exploratory avenue. And finally, again, hymnals are an amazing resource for seeing voice leading in action. And if you are so inclined, Bach chorales are even better. I think they are the kind of the foundational example of the development of voice leading historically. In this context, where secondary dominants are employed, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So that's kind of, this is the kind of the final example. We're doing this song tonight with the choir room, with Kirk Whalum, and it's going to be amazing. And so this is kind of, we're doing a different key, but this is maybe a compressed version of the final chorus. I'll play it if you guys want to sing it, and then you can ask a few more questions, and then I probably have to wrap this up. Here we go. Thank you guys. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
A minor 11, man. I wasn't bumping in.